So it's like I have to grip my teeth somewhat because I find the TLM. I in many ways I understand actually their critiques of the Roman form, but as a liturgical act, it's a little bit problematic. I think that there's a lot of the low mass culture that's tied up in how they even think of high masses. It's still not a kind of unified liturgical act. I'd like to not go there. Yeah, go ahead, unless you want to go there.
No. So what we're talking about here is not, the question of the Latin Mass and the pre-Reformed rites, but I think, what was his name? No. It was Thomas Day, Why Catholics Can't Sing. And he talked a lot about this Irish subculture, in layman's language, the beaten wife syndrome of basically the burden that Irish Catholics had to deal with being martyred and suppressed and being stripped of their rights and their property for being Catholic in England, and the great polemic between Irish Catholic clergy and therefore Catholic culture against the Protestant high-sung Anglican services and that kind of like low mass culture, which is it's not Catholic, but it's that it falls into that tendency of the either or rather than the both and tension within most Catholic, disputes in 2000 years, where it's, well, we don't need the singing, we don't need this. And I can't blame them. I mean, look at the horrible tragedy, myself with some Scotch-Irish roots, the terrible tragedy that the Irish went through, but that filtered through generations and kind of became the cultural status quo and has heavily influenced American, Roman Latin Catholicism.
Yeah, and I think even in a way, it influences even like traditionalist Catholicism in America to the degree that, how to put this, even at a high mass, everything that's done in the domain of the chant is treated as quite, and so it's window dressing.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe this is the point this is the example I always use, but you can tell that the creed is being recited solely by the priest. Whenever the priest goes over and sits down, whenever he's done, basically ahead of the choir.
Mm-hmm.
There's something slightly off with a liturgy like that has this window dressing sung creed that's not an actual liturgical action. The head and body are kind of out of sync, maybe is the way to put it. Right, that the priest acting in person of Christ, the head of the church, is, at least sacramentally there, is doing kind of one tier, and you've got the body of the faithful there, kind of like it's two disjointed events going on. But I'm not looking to necessarily mediate my place, but it gives you a feeling for where I'm at. But I try to do it. My wife gets nervous. I get a little bit vexed about these things, but I do support it. I find that form is the homogeneous handing on of their ritual tradition, actually, in the West.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm actually, like I say, in a certain sense, very, even if not spiritually, kind of in that world, I'm actually very supportive of the traditional Latin form. So that's her heart and soul, but she actually used to go, she was like a liturgy junkie when she was in graduate school. She would go to just liturgies all over. She'd go to her either conservative Roman Catholic liturgy or even a traditional, like a Novus Ordo liturgy or a traditional form, which she later got into. She just grew up in a normal, suburban Roman Catholic household. So nothing that would have predisposed her for this, but she was influenced deeply by some of the monks at St. Vincent who were good guys to kind of start down this path. And then as she was in graduate school, she continued. And she would even go, I forget where she was in the Midwest, where she would go to Coptic Orthodox liturgies because it had connections to one of her professors in college. And, they would always look at her, rather white looking girl, like, are you here for a project or what are you doing here? They should stick out in this Egyptian parish. And they're kind of nervous.
Like Adrian Fortescue going down into the Middle East. Hey, I want to get this, experience. Yeah. And then he becomes a machine gun fighter in the process, an untold story, so to speak, or a forgotten story of Fortescue, right?
Yeah. And so, and I guess, I don't know what would be my analogy for my wife having that sort of change, but so she was a liturgy junkie, very comfortable with the East, more than I. I used to think of the East as being this sort of the worst of the insecure side of certain Orthodox polemics.
Mm-hmm.
A kind of woolly-headed mysticism that asserted it was better than the West, but it really didn't have an explanation for why. It just asserted that. And I ran into that a couple times, once especially with a certain Russian Catholic priest who was it was pretty ignorant, something he said to me about being a Westerner at his liturgy. And I actually didn't go back to an Eastern liturgy for a long while. So then I fell in love with it. And she, for a long time, used to say to me, remember, I've been to more Eastern liturgies than you. Now, I didn't become some Eastern apologist, but she was very just at home with it. And she wanted me to, take the time to discern whether or not I was going to change ritual churches. But she said, you're going to have to be fine with the fact that I'm not going to change, but like, I'm totally comfortable with our household having basically these two aspects and primarily being Eastern for the sake of the kids. And, she was it was very easy, actually.